What if the key to unlocking a future you never dreamed of was hanging around your neck? A forgotten relic from a past that wasn't even yours? What if a life of struggle, of scraping by just to keep a loved one alive, could be transformed in a single moment by a chance encounter with a stranger? For one weary waitress, a single tarnished piece of jewelry became the catalyst that would unravel a decades-old secret, a conspiracy of heartache, and a truth so profound it would rewrite her entire existence. This is a story about a silver locket, a love torn apart by cruelty, and a test of character so demanding it could shatter a young woman's spirit or forge it into something unbreakable. The air in the 24-hour diner was thick with the smell of stale coffee and fried onions, a perfume Lena Williams had long stopped noticing. It was just the scent of survival. At 24, her life was a repeating loop of sore feet, lukewarm staff meals, and the gnawing anxiety that hummed beneath the surface of every polite smile she offered her customers. The loop had one purpose: to keep her mother, Sarah, alive. Sarah's heart, a fragile, fluttering thing, was failing. The stack of medical bills on their tiny kitchen table grew with a malevolent persistence that Lena's double shifts could never quite conquer. Each new bill was a paper ghost, haunting her waking hours and her brief, troubled sleep. Tonight was no different. The midnight rush had subsided, leaving behind a scattering of lonely truckers and insomniacs nursing cups of coffee. Lena moved between the tables, her body an automaton of efficiency. Refill coffee, clear plates, wipe counter, repeat. Her own reflection in the polished steel of the coffee machine looked like a stranger. A pale, tired girl with dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. She felt a familiar pang of despair, a cold wave that threatened to pull her under. She pushed it down. She had to, for her mom. Her mother was her entire world. Sarah, even with her failing health, was a source of quiet light. She would sit in her worn armchair by the window, her breath sometimes shallow, and tell Lena stories. But the stories always had gaps, especially the ones about Lena's father. He was a ghost, a man her mother remembered with a sad, wistful fondness but few details. He was kind, Sarah would say, her fingers tracing the rim of a teacup. He had the gentlest eyes. And he gave me this, for you. She would touch the simple silver locket that now hung around Lena's neck. It was shaped like a bird's wing, a starling's wing, Sarah had specified once. It was the only thing Lena had of him. A soft chime from the bell over the door pulled Lena from her thoughts. An old woman stood there, silhouetted for a moment against the dark, rain-slicked street. She was unlike the diner's usual clientele. Even in the harsh fluorescent light, her elegance was undeniable. She wore a simple but exquisitely cut cashmere coat, and her white hair was styled in a chic, severe bob. She moved with a straight-backed grace that defied her age, her eyes sweeping the room with a sharp, intelligent gaze before settling on an empty booth in the corner. Lena grabbed a menu and a glass of water, pasting on her professional smile. "Evening, ma'am. Table for one." The woman nodded, her expression unreadable. She slid into the booth, placing a small leather handbag on the seat beside her. "Just coffee for now." Black, her voice was low and cultured, but held a note of gravelly weariness. Lena poured the coffee, her movements practiced and smooth. As she set the cup down, the woman's eyes weren't on the menu or the coffee. They were on her. It was an unnerving, penetrating stare, as if she were looking not at Lena, but through her, searching for something. Lena felt a strange prickle of self-consciousness. She smoothed her apron. "Will you be needing anything else to start?"
No.
"Thank you." The woman's gaze finally dropped to her cup. Lena retreated behind the counter, trying to shake off the unsettling encounter. She busied herself wiping down the espresso machine, but she could feel the old woman's eyes on her again. It was a heavy, persistent scrutiny. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The woman didn't touch her coffee. She just sat there watching. Finally, Lena's boss, a gruff man named Sal, nudged her. "Go see what she wants. She's burning a hole in the vinyl." Taking a deep breath, Lena walked back to the booth. Is everything all right, ma'am? Can I get you a fresh cup? As she leaned forward to pick up the cold mug, the silver locket swung out from under the collar of her uniform. It caught the light, a small metallic glint against the drab polyester of her shirt. The effect on the old woman was immediate and terrifying. Her perfectly composed face crumpled. A sharp gasp escaped her lips, a sound of profound shock. The hand that had been resting on the table flew to her mouth, and her eyes, wide with disbelief, were fixed on the starling wing. They filled with tears, which spilled over and traced new, glistening paths down her wrinkled cheeks. Her whole body began to tremble. With a clatter that echoed in the quiet diner, her spoon slipped from her other hand and fell to the floor. The woman looked as if she had seen a ghost. In a way, she had. The diner fell into a strange, suspended silence. The lone trucker in the back looked up from his pie, and Sal poked his head out from the kitchen. All eyes were on the weeping woman in the corner booth and the stunned waitress standing over her. Lena felt a hot flush of panic. She hadn't done anything, had she? Mom? Are you okay? Should I call someone? Lena's voice was a whisper. The woman, Eleanor, didn't seem to hear her. She was lost in a memory, her gaze locked on the locket with an intensity that felt like a physical force. Her breathing was ragged. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers bony and adorned with a single, discreet diamond ring. She didn't touch Lena, but gestured toward the necklace. Where? She choked out, her voice thick with unshed tears. Where did you get that? Lena instinctively put a hand over the locket, shielding it. It was her only link to her father, a sacred object. It was my mother's, she said softly. She gave it to me. The woman's face contorted with a fresh wave of pain. Your mother. She looked from the locket to Lena's face, truly seeing her for the first time. She studied her eyes, the shape of her jaw, the curve of her brow. It was a desperate, searching look. What is your name, child? Lena. Lena Williams. The name seemed to mean nothing to her. The flicker of frantic hope in her eyes dimmed slightly, replaced by a profound, bottomless sorrow. She sank back against the vinyl booth, looking defeated. Of course, she murmured, more to herself than to Lena. It wouldn't be. Lena felt a confusing mix of fear, pity, and a strange, protective anger. This woman was a stranger, yet her reaction to the locket felt deeply personal, an intrusion into the private history of her family. I'm sorry, Lena said, unsure what she was apologizing for. It's just a necklace. No, the woman whispered, shaking her head. It is not just a necklace. She fumbled in her handbag, her movements still unsteady. She pulled out a pristine, cream-colored wallet and extracted several $100 bills, far more than enough to cover a cup of coffee. She laid them on the table, her hand still shaking. Then, she took out a slim business card and a small, gold-plated pen. She scribbled something on the back of the card. Please, she said, her voice regaining a sliver of its earlier command, though it was still fragile. She pushed the card and the money across the table. I know this is unorthodox, but I implore you, call me. It is a matter of the utmost importance. It is about that necklace. Without another word, she slid out of the booth, pulled her cashmere coat tightly around herself, and walked out of the diner, leaving a stunned Lena standing in a pool of bewildered silence. Lena looked down at the table. $500 lay next to a business card that read, simply, Eleanor Vance. Beneath the name was a single phone number. On the back, in elegant, slightly shaky script, were the words, Please call me. It's urgent. Sal waddled over, his eyes wide. What in the world was that all about? Who was that lady? He whistled at the money. Looks like you got a good tip, whatever it was. Lena pocketed the card, her mind reeling. Eleanor Vance. The name sounded vaguely familiar. She scooped up the money, her hands trembling now, too. $500. That was half a month's rent. It was a refill on her mother's most expensive prescription. It was a breath of air in a life that felt like a constant state of drowning. But it came with a heavy, invisible string attached. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, the business card in her hand. The rain had stopped, and the city lights cast a faint orange glow into their small apartment. In the other room, she could hear her mother's soft, rhythmic breathing, punctuated by the occasional wheeze that always sent a spike of fear through Lena's heart. What should she do? The woman was clearly wealthy, and just as clearly unstable. Her reaction had been extreme, unsettling. Maybe she was just a grieving old woman who had once owned a similar piece of jewelry. Maybe it was a coincidence. But her eyes, the raw, desperate pain in them had felt like anything but. Lena looked at the stack of bills on the table. The latest one, from the cardiologist, was on top. Final notice. The words seemed to scream at her. Her mother needed a new round of tests, a procedure that wasn't fully covered by their meager insurance. The doctors had been clear. Without it, her condition would continue to decline. The $500 was a godsend, but it was a bandage on a gaping wound. This Eleanor Vance, whoever she was, had offered a lifeline. Or a trap. Lena's every instinct screamed for her to protect herself, to protect the fragile memory of her parents. But the desperation was a stronger force. Her mother's soft sigh from the bedroom made the decision for her. She had no choice. She had to take the risk. The next morning, with a heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs, Lena dialed the number on the card. A crisp, professional voice answered on the first ring. Ms. Vance's private line. Hello? Lena began, her own voice sounding small and reedy. My name is Lena Williams. I was asked to call by Ms. Vance. There was a pause, and then the voice returned, warmer now. Ah, yes, Miss Williams. Ms. Vance has been expecting your call. She would like to see you. Can you be at Vance Tower in 1 hour? Vance Tower. Lena repeated, her stomach twisting. Now she knew why the name was familiar. Vance Enterprises was one of the biggest conglomerates in the country. Eleanor Vance wasn't just wealthy. She was a titan, a legend, a billionaire. An hour later, Lena stood in the cavernous, marble-floored lobby of Vance Tower, feeling as small and out of place as a sparrow in a cathedral. The opulence was suffocating. Men and women in sharp suits moved with a brisk, silent purpose, their expensive shoes clicking on the polished floor. A security guard directed her to a private elevator, which whisked her silently up 80 floors in less than a minute. The elevator opened directly into a sprawling penthouse office. The entire far wall was a sheet of glass, offering a breathtaking, godlike view of the city below. The space was minimalist and sterile, decorated in shades of white, gray, and chrome. It was less a room than a statement of power. Eleanor Vance was standing by the window, her back to the door. She wore a simple gray silk blouse and tailored trousers. She looked more composed today, but there was a tension in her posture. Miss Williams, she said, without turning around. Thank you for coming. You said it was urgent, Lena replied, clutching the strap of her worn handbag. Eleanor finally turned. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed with sleeplessness, but the raw emotion from the diner was gone, replaced by a guarded, analytical expression. It is, she gestured to a severe leather chair opposite her massive glass desk. Please, seat. Lena sat, perching on the edge of the seat. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Eleanor walked slowly to her desk and sat down, her gaze once again finding the locket at Lena's throat. I will not waste your time with pleasantries, Miss Williams, Eleanor began, her voice steady. The necklace you are wearing. I need to know everything about it, about how your mother came to possess it. I told you it was a gift, from my father. And your father, what do you know of him? Eleanor's voice was carefully neutral, but Lena could see the effort it took to maintain that control. Almost nothing, Lena admitted, a familiar ache in her chest. My mother, her memory of that time is not clear. She was young. Things were difficult. She says he was a good man, that he loved her. But he left before I was born. Eleanor listened, her hands clasped tightly on the desk. The mask of composure slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the grief beneath. I am going to make you an offer, Lena, she said, her use of Lena's first name startlingly intimate. It will sound strange, but I need your help. The necklace you wear is connected to a person I lost, a person I loved more than life itself. For years, I have searched for answers about what happened to him. I believe your mother may hold the key. She paused, her eyes boring into Lena's. I want to hire you. Quit your job at that diner. I will pay you a salary, a generous one. More importantly, I will assume full, immediate financial responsibility for all of your mother's medical care. The best doctors, the best hospitals, whatever she needs. It will all be taken care of. Lena stared at her, speechless. It was an impossible offer. It was everything she had ever prayed for. But what was the catch? Hire me to do what? To help me, Eleanor said simply. To talk to your mother. To help me piece together a history that was stolen from me. I need you to be my partner in an investigation. Personal one. All I ask for is your time and your honesty. Hope and suspicion warred within Lena. It was too good to be true. Rich people didn't just hand out miracles in diners. There had to be more to it. Why me? You're Eleanor Vance. You could hire the best private investigators in the world. I have, Eleanor said, a flicker of bitterness in her tone. For 25 years, they have found nothing. But they did not have the key. Her eyes went to the locket again. You do. Your mother is the first real lead I have had in more than 2 decades. But I cannot approach her myself. A stranger asking questions about her past might frighten her, especially if her health is fragile. You are her daughter. She trusts you. You are the only one who can do this. Lena thought of her mother's tired, loving face. She thought of the doctor's grim prognosis, the ticking clock. This woman was offering her a chance to save her mother's life. What was her pride, her suspicion, compared to that? Her heart pounding, Lena met the billionaire's intense gaze. Okay, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I'll do it. A profound, shuddering sigh escaped Eleanor's lips. The formidable mask fell away completely, and for a moment, she was just an old, grieving woman. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you. The transition was dizzying. One day, Lena was serving greasy bacon and eggs. The next, she was being handed a platinum credit card by Eleanor's personal assistant for incidentals, and watching as a team of the world's top cardiologists was assembled to review her mother's case files. Sarah was moved from her noisy, overcrowded ward at the city hospital to a serene private suite at the prestigious Beaumont Clinic, a place that looked more like a 5-star hotel than a medical facility. The relief was so immense, so all-consuming, that Lena felt lightheaded. For the first time in years, she could breathe without the weight of impending financial ruin crushing her chest. She explained the sudden windfall to her mother in carefully edited terms. She had taken on a new job, she said, as a personal assistant to a wealthy philanthropist. It was demanding, but it came with an incredible healthcare package. Sarah, weak but overjoyed for her daughter, didn't question it. She just squeezed Lena's hand, her eyes shining with tears of relief. You work too hard, my sweet girl, she whispered. But I'm so proud of you. The words were both a comfort and a sharp pang of guilt. Lena's new office was a quiet, sun-drenched study in Eleanor Vance's penthouse. It was a world away from the chrome and glass of the main office. This room was personal, filled with books, art, and ghosts. On Eleanor's instructions, several large, dust-covered boxes had been brought up from a storage vault. They were sealed with brittle, yellowed tape. These belong to my son, Eleanor said, her voice quiet as she stood beside the boxes. Her composure was back, but a deep well of sadness was visible in her eyes. His name was Robert. She ran a hand over the top of one of the boxes, a gesture of infinite tenderness. This is where we begin. Lena's heart gave a nervous flutter. Ms. Vance. Eleanor, what exactly are we looking for? Eleanor finally sat in a worn leather armchair, her gaze distant. The locket you wear, she began. The starling wing. I gave it to Robert for his 21st birthday. He was a passionate ornithologist, a bird watcher. He could spend days in the wilderness just watching, listening. The starling, he told me, was a marvel of adaptation. A common bird, but an extraordinary one. He loved them. She paused, lost in the memory. He wore it always. And then one day he was gone. Gone. Lena asked softly. He disappeared from my life? Eleanor said, her voice hardening with old pain. He was 26. We had an argument. Terrible one. It was about a woman he was seeing. I disapproved. I thought she was unsuitable, beneath him. I said things a mother should never say. The next day he was gone. He left a short, cold note. It said he was leaving and I should not look for him. I didn't hear from him again. The investigators I hired eventually found evidence suggesting he had died in a hiking accident a year later in South America. They never found a body, but the trail went cold. The grief in the room was a tangible thing. Lena felt a profound sympathy for the old woman. To lose a child, to have your last memory be one of anger and disapproval, it was a unique kind of hell. I am so sorry, Lena whispered. Eleanor gave a sharp, dismissive wave of her hand, as if batting away the pity. I don't need sympathy, child. I need answers. For 25 years, I have lived with the belief that my son died alone in some jungle, hating me. But then you walked into that diner, and you were wearing his locket. Her eyes, sharp and intense, locked onto Lena's. This was it, the first twist of the key in the lock. That locket means one of two things, Eleanor stated, her voice trembling with the weight of the words. Either some stranger found it and it has passed through a dozen hands to find its way to your mother, or your mother was the woman my son loved. The air left Lena's lungs. Her father, the kind man with gentle eyes. Was it possible? Was Robert Vance, the lost son of a billionaire, the ghost who had haunted her life? My mother's name is Sarah, Lena said, her voice barely audible. Does that name mean anything to you? Eleanor's face fell. She shook her head slowly. No. The woman, Robert, refused to tell me her name. He knew I would use my resources to investigate her, to dig up anything I could to discredit her. He just called her his starling. He said she was like the bird, common to most, but a marvel to him. Starling. The word hung in the air between them. The starling wing. So we start here, Eleanor said, gesturing to the boxes. We look for a name, a photograph, a clue. Anything that connects my son, Robert, to your mother, Sarah. Together, they broke the seal on the first box. The air filled with the musty scent of old paper and forgotten time. It was a time capsule of a young man's life. There were university textbooks on biology and ecology, dog-eared field guides to birds of North America, binoculars in a worn leather case, journals filled with meticulous notes on migration patterns and bird calls. Lena felt like a trespasser, sifting through the intimate details of a dead man's life. But as she read Robert's neat, slanted handwriting, a picture of him began to form. He was passionate, intelligent, and sensitive. He wrote about the beauty of a hawk on the wind and the intricate song of a wood thrush with a poet's soul. He was not the spoiled scion of a corporate dynasty she might have imagined. He was a gentle spirit, much like the man her mother had described. For hours they worked, sifting through papers, photo albums, and keepsakes. They found pictures of Robert as a boy, a teenager, a young man. He had a warm smile and kind eyes, just as Sarah had said. Lena's heart ached. Was she looking at the face of her father? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the study, Eleanor opened a smaller, flat box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were dozens of letters, tied in bundles with faded ribbon. He kept every letter he ever received, Eleanor murmured, her fingers hovering over them. Lena picked up the first bundle. The postmarks were from all over the world, from fellow academics, from friends on expeditions. The letters were full of scientific jargon and shared excitement over rare bird sightings. They spent another hour going through them, finding nothing personal. And then, At the very bottom of the box, Lena found it. A small, separate bundle, tied not with ribbon, but with a simple piece of string. The envelopes were different, plain, cheap paper. The handwriting on them was a graceful, feminine script. There was no return address. They were simply addressed to Robert. With trembling hands, Lena untied the string. Eleanor leaned forward, her breath held. Lena pulled out the first letter and began to read. "My dearest R," the letter began. "I miss you more than words can say. The days we spend apart feel like a lifetime. I keep rereading your last letter, the one about the peregrine falcons on the bridge. You make the world sound like a magical place." Lena's eyes scanned down the page, her heart hammering. The letter was signed, simply with a single initial. "All my love, forever, S." "S" for Sarah. It had to be. A profound and heavy silence descended upon the study. Lena held the delicate, time-thinned paper in her hand as if it were a sacred text. S. It was not definitive proof, but in her heart, she knew. This was her mother's handwriting. This was a letter from her mother to her father. Eleanor sat frozen in her armchair, her knuckles white where she gripped the worn leather. The ghost they had been chasing for hours had finally begun to take shape. "Read it," Eleanor commanded, her voice a raw whisper. "Read it aloud." Lena took a shaky breath and began. The words painted a picture of a secret, stolen romance. A love that bloomed in quiet corners, away from judging eyes. Sarah, it had to be Sarah, wrote of meeting Robert in public libraries and small, out-of-the-way parks. She wrote about his passion for birds, a world so different from her own, and how he made her see the magic in everyday things. She described him not as a wealthy heir, but as a kind, brilliant man with a gentle soul who was burdened by his family's expectations. "You talk about your mother with such a mix of love and fear," Lena read, her voice trembling slightly. "I wish she could see the man I see. Not the future CEO of Vance Enterprises, but the man who will stand in the rain for an hour just to watch a robin feed its young. That is the man I love." Lena finished the letter and looked up. Tears were streaming silently down Eleanor's face, but her expression was hard, a mask of self-recrimination. "I did that," she said, her voice brittle. "I made him afraid. I made him hide the best part of his life from me." They spent the next hour reading through the small bundle of letters. Each one deepened the story. It was clear that Robert and Sarah were deeply in love, but it was a love fraught with the anxiety of discovery. Robert wrote of the immense pressure from his mother to marry within their social circle, to take his rightful place in the company, a life he clearly detested. Sarah wrote of her own insecurities, of feeling like she wasn't good enough, of the chasm between their worlds. The last letter in the bundle was the most poignant. "I don't care about the money, Sarah had written. "I don't care about the penthouse and the fancy cars. I would live in a shack with you if it meant we could be together without hiding. But I won't be the reason you lose your family. If you cannot tell your mother about us, then perhaps we are not meant to be." It was a letter full of love, but also an ultimatum. And there was no reply from Robert in the box. "This is where it ended," Eleanor murmured, her face ashen. "He must have received this letter. And then we had our final argument. I pushed him, and this girl, Sarah, was pulling him. He was torn apart. And he chose to walk away from both of us." The narrative seemed to settle into a tragic but simple story of love, thwarted by class and family pressure. But it didn't feel complete. It didn't explain how Sarah ended up with the locket, or why her memory of this intense, life-altering romance was so fragmented and vague. Just as they were about to pack up for the day, a sharp, authoritative rap echoed from the study door. Before Eleanor could answer, the door swung open. A man stood in the doorway, framed like a portrait of corporate power. He was in his late 30s, tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Lena earned in 6 months. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and he had a handsome, angular face. But his smile, a flash of brilliant white teeth, did not reach his eyes. His eyes were cold, shrewd, and analytical. They swept the room, taking in the dusty boxes, the scattered letters, and finally, settling on Lena with a look of undisguised curiosity and suspicion. "Aunt Eleanor," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "I came to see how you were. I was told you were indisposed." His gaze flickered meaningfully toward Lena. "Julian," Eleanor said, her tone instantly becoming more formal, the warmth draining from her voice. "I am perfectly fine. I am busy." "So I see," Julian said, stepping into the room. He walked with a predator's easy grace. "Revisiting old ghosts?" He gestured to the boxes. "I thought we agreed this was unhealthy for you." "What you and I agree upon is of little consequence, Julian," Eleanor retorted sharply. "This is my house. These were my son's belongings." She turned to Lena. "Lena, this is my nephew, Julian Croft. He is the CEO of Vance Enterprises. Julian, this is Miss Lena Williams. She is my new personal assistant." Julian's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly as he extended a hand to Lena. His handshake was firm, dry, and brief. "A pleasure, Miss Williams," he said, though his tone suggested it was anything but. "I wasn't aware my aunt was hiring. The agency is usually instructed to run all candidates by my office first." "This was a private arrangement," Eleanor said, cutting him off. "I see," Julian said slowly, his cold eyes flitting from Lena's simple clothes to the locket that still hung around her neck. He was assessing her, categorizing her, and Lena felt a chill run down her spine. He made her feel like an insect under a microscope. "Well," he continued, turning his charming, empty smile back to Eleanor, "the board is concerned, Aunt Eleanor. You've missed several key meetings. You've been unreachable. When you start canceling appointments and hiring assistants without consulting anyone, people begin to worry about your state of mind, about your fitness to lead." The threat was veiled, but unmistakable. He was questioning her competence. "My fitness," Eleanor said, her voice dangerously low, "is the reason you have a company to run it all, Julian. Do not forget that. Now, if you'll excuse us, Lena and I have work to do." It was a clear dismissal. Julian's smile tightened at the edges. He gave Lena one last, long, dismissive look, a look that said, "I see you, and I know what you are." He saw a gold digger, a grifter, an opportunist who had somehow sunk her claws into his aging, vulnerable aunt. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Whatever you say, Aunt Eleanor. We'll talk later." He turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind him, but his menacing presence lingered in the room like a toxic vapor. Lena let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "He doesn't like me very much. Julian doesn't like anyone who might distract me from signing the papers he puts in front of me," Eleanor said grimly. "His father, my late husband's brother, was a cold man. Julian is twice the man his father was, and I do not mean that as a compliment. He is ambitious and ruthless. Be careful around him, Lena. He sees you as a threat." "A threat to what?" "To his control," Eleanor answered. "For years, I have been a ghost in this company, a figurehead. I let him and his father before him run everything. I didn't have the heart for it after Robert left. But now," she looked at the letters in Lena's hand, a new fire igniting in her tired eyes. "Now I have a reason to care again, and Julian will not like that one bit." The arrival of Julian Croft changed everything. The quiet, melancholic investigation into the past was now charged with a new and present danger. He began a campaign of subtle harassment. He would accidentally schedule important meetings for Eleanor at the same time she was meant to be working with Lena. He would call the penthouse constantly, demanding his aunt's attention for trivial matters. He instructed the household staff to report on Lena's activities, a fact the family's longtime butler, a kind man named Arthur, confessed to Lena with an apologetic whisper. Julian confronted Lena directly a few days later. He cornered her in the hallway as she was heading to the study. "Miss Williams," he said, his voice deceptively pleasant. "A word, if I may." He steered her towards the massive floor-to-ceiling window, the city sprawling beneath them like a map. "It's quite a view, isn't it?" The kind of view that can make a person feel powerful. It can make a person believe they belong here. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. But belonging is not something one can just acquire. I'm not trying to acquire anything, Mr. Croft, Lena said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. I'm just doing the job your aunt hired me for. Ah yes, the job, he said with a cynical smirk. Digging up a 25-year-old tragedy. A very specific skill set. Tell me, what were you doing before you became so indispensable to my aunt? A barista? A cashier? I was a waitress, Lena said, lifting her chin. She would not let him make her feel ashamed. A waitress, he repeated, as if the word tasted foul. And now you're here, in a penthouse with a direct line to one of the wealthiest women in the world. It's a remarkable story. Fairy tale, almost. But I don't believe in fairy tales. His eyes, hard as chips of ice, pinned her. I've had you looked into, of course. Lena Williams. Mother with extensive medical debts. A life of quiet desperation. Then, a chance encounter in a greasy spoon, and suddenly all your problems vanish. It's a classic grift. Find a lonely, grieving old woman. Prey on her emotions, and secure your future. It's not even original. You're wrong, Lena said, her voice shaking with quiet fury. This isn't about money. This is about finding the truth. The truth, he scoffed. The truth is that my cousin Robert was a weak, sentimental fool who threw his life away. My aunt has been mourning him for a quarter of a century. What she needs is to move on, to focus on the future of her legacy, of my legacy. What she does not need is a conniving little nobody whispering ghost stories in her ear, reopening old wounds, and giving her false hope. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. So here's my offer. I will give you a check. Enough to set you and your mother up for life. A quiet life, somewhere far away from here. All you have to do is walk away. Tell my aunt you've had a change of heart. Disappear. It's a much cleaner ending to your little fairy tale. Lena stared at him, at his handsome, soulless face. He thought he could buy her. He thought she was just like him, motivated by greed. In that moment, her resolve hardened from a fragile hope into tempered steel. This was no longer just for her mother, or even for the memory of her father. It was for Eleanor. It was for Robert. It was to prove this cynical, cruel man wrong. My integrity is not for sale, Mr. Croft, she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even herself. Now if you'll excuse me, your aunt is waiting. She brushed past him, her head held high, leaving him standing by the window with a look of pure, unadulterated fury on his face. The battle lines had been drawn. Lena's defiance only strengthened Julian's resolve to get rid of her. He understood that a direct assault wouldn't work. Eleanor was too protective now, her interest in the past reignited by the tantalizing clues they were uncovering. So Julian shifted his strategy. He couldn't attack Lena, so he would attack the investigation itself. He began to subtly undermine their progress, creating obstacles and sowing seeds of doubt wherever he could. Aunt Eleanor, he'd say over their tense family dinners, his tone dripping with false concern. I spoke with Dr. Albright today. He mentioned your blood pressure is elevated. All this stress, raking over the past. Is it really worth jeopardizing your health? He also began to restrict their access to information. When Eleanor asked for corporate records from 25 years ago, transportation logs, security personnel files, Julian would delay. The files are in deep storage, Aunt Eleanor, he'd claim. It will take weeks to retrieve them. The archive is a mess. But Lena and Eleanor were undeterred. They had the letters. They had a name or at least an initial. They had a story. They decided to change their approach. If they couldn't find Sarah in Robert's past, perhaps they could find Robert in Sarah's. This meant talking to Lena's mother. It was a delicate operation. Sarah's health had stabilized at the Beaumont Clinic. The constant stress of her previous life lifted, but she was still fragile. Lena couldn't just bombard her with questions. She had to be gentle. She started by bringing the locket with her on her next visit. Mom, she began, sitting by her mother's bedside. I was thinking about Dad today. You never talk about him much. Sarah's expression grew distant, that familiar veil of sad confusion clouding her eyes. Oh, honey, there's not much to tell. It was all so long ago. It feels like a dream. But you remember him giving you this, right? Lena asked, touching the starling wing at her neck. Oh, yes, Sarah said, a faint smile touching her lips. I remember that. He said it was a piece of him. A promise. A promise for what? Sarah's brow furrowed. I don't remember. He was going away for a little while. He said he had to take care of something with his family. He promised he would come back for me. He gave me the necklace and told me not to lose it. He said it would lead him back to me, her eyes filled with tears. But he never came back. This was different from the vague stories she had told before. It was more specific. Promise. Planned return. This didn't sound like a man who was abandoning her. It sounded like a man who fully intended to come back. His family, Mom? Did you ever meet them? Did you know anything about them? Lena pressed gently. Sarah shook her head, a look of fear flashing in her eyes. No. He said they were difficult, especially his mother. He said she would never approve of me. He wanted to wait to tell her to do it the right way. We were going to run away together just for a while, start over somewhere new. Then, when the baby came, she patted Lena's hand. He was going to go back and face them. He was sure they would accept us once they saw you. The story pouring out of Sarah was a revelation. It matched the narrative from the letters perfectly. The secret love, the fear of his mother, the plan to run away. Lena's heart ached for the young, hopeful couple they must have been. What happened, Mom? Why didn't you go with him? Sarah's face clouded over completely. The clarity vanished, replaced by a fog of confusion and pain. I don't know, she whispered, her voice distressed. I waited for him. We were supposed to meet at the old bus station downtown. He was going to bring the tickets, but he never showed up. And then, it's all a blur. I remember being so heartbroken. I felt sick. The next thing I really remember clearly, I was in a different city. I had a little bit of money in my pocket and a note that just said, he's not coming back. Move on. I thought he had changed his mind. I thought he'd abandoned me. Lena felt a cold dread creep up her spine. A blur? Waking up in a different city? A cruel, anonymous note? This wasn't a simple case of a lover getting cold feet. This was something else. Something sinister. She relayed the conversation to Eleanor, every painful detail. The old woman listened, her face growing paler with each word. The bus station, Eleanor murmured. He never showed up. She wakes up somewhere else. She stood up and began to pace the study, her movements agitated. This is wrong. This is all wrong. Robert would never have done that. He loved her. The letters prove it. He would not have abandoned a pregnant woman he loved. Then what happened? Lena asked. Someone stopped him, Eleanor said, her voice grim. Or someone stopped her. The thought was chilling. They needed more than fragmented memories and old love letters. They needed proof. They went back to the boxes, searching with a new, frantic energy. They sifted through every scrap of paper, every photograph, every book. And then, tucked inside a heavy volume on ornithological illustration, they found it. It was a single, folded piece of paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a page torn from a journal. The handwriting was Robert's, but it was messy, agitated. It was dated the day before he was supposed to meet Sarah at the bus station. It was the missing piece, the midpoint revelation that would change everything. She is everything, the entry began. And my mother sees nothing but her own ambition. I tried to tell her again tonight. I tried to make her understand. She called us a fortune hunter, an obstacle. She threatened to disinherit me. I don't care about the money. I told her that. I told her I was leaving with S tomorrow, and there was nothing she could do to stop me. Lena's breath hitched. This was the argument Eleanor had described. But it's not just her. The entry continued, the handwriting growing more frantic. It's Croft. He's always watching. My mother's man. He follows me. He has people watching us. He told me this evening a quiet warning, he called it. He said people like her can have accidents, he said, for my own good. And for hers, I should walk away. It wasn't advice. It was a threat. I fear what he might do. But I will not be intimidated. I will be at the station tomorrow. Love is more powerful than fear. It has to be. Lena looked up from the page, her eyes wide with horror. Croft, she whispered. He mentioned a Croft. Eleanor had frozen, her hand covering her mouth. My brother-in-law, she breathed. Julian's father, Jonathan Croft. He was the head of security for the company for 30 years. My husband trusted him implicitly. After my husband died, I relied on him for everything. He was my right-hand man, my enforcer. The pieces were slotting into place, forming a picture of unimaginable cruelty. It wasn't Eleanor who had directly driven her son away. She had provided the motive, the disapproval. But the weapon, the hand that did the dirty work, belonged to Jonathan Croft. He had threatened his own nephew. He had threatened a helpless young woman to protect the family name. What did he do? Lena asked, her voice shaking. What did Jonathan Croft do to my mother? Eleanor looked at her, her face a mask of dawning horror. I don't know, she said. But we are going to find out. The grief in her eyes was now mingled with a cold, hard fury. The investigation was no longer about solving a mystery. It was about avenging a crime. The discovery of Robert's journal entry, implicating Jonathan Croft, cast a dark and menacing shadow over the past. It also explained Julian's frantic efforts to shut down their investigation. He wasn't just protecting his aunt's fragile emotions or his own inheritance. He was protecting his father's legacy. He was burying a crime. Julian, sensing the shift in the atmosphere and the hardening of his aunt's resolve, knew he was losing control. He decided he had to take Lena out of the equation once and for all. His previous offer of a payoff had been an insult. Now, he would resort to the tactics his father had perfected: sabotage and destruction. His plan was as cruel as it was simple. He couldn't get Lena fired, so he would have her disgraced. He would frame her for theft, an act so blatant and undeniable that even Eleanor, in her sentimental state, would have no choice but to cast her out. He waited for his opportunity. A few days later, Eleanor was hosting a small, exclusive charity dinner at the penthouse. The apartment was filled with some of the city's most powerful and influential figures. Lena, at Eleanor's insistence, was helping to coordinate the event, acting as a hostess and ensuring everything ran smoothly. She wore a simple black dress that Arthur, the butler, had helped her procure, a loan from his own daughter. She looked elegant and composed, moving through the glittering crowd with a quiet confidence that infuriated Julian. To him, she was a pretender, an imposter in their world, and he was determined to expose her. During a moment when the guests were gathered on the terrace to watch a fireworks display, Julian put his plan into motion. He slipped into Eleanor's private dressing room, a sanctuary that was strictly off-limits to staff and guests. He knew his aunt's habits. In a velvet-lined drawer of her antique jewelry armoire was a collection of pieces she rarely wore. Among them was a magnificent sapphire and diamond necklace. A famous piece known as the Vance Star. It was worth a fortune. But more than that, it was an iconic symbol of the Vance dynasty. With gloved hands, Julian took the necklace. He then found Lena's handbag, which she had left in the small staff office off the main kitchen. He unzipped it and dropped the heavy, glittering necklace inside, burying it beneath her wallet and keys. He zipped the bag shut and returned to the party, his expression a perfect mask of convivial charm. 20 minutes later, he sought out his aunt, his face a picture of manufactured panic. "Aunt Eleanor," he said, his voice low and urgent, pulling her away from a conversation with a senator. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but something is wrong." "What is it, Julian?" Eleanor asked, annoyed at the interruption. "The Vance Star," he whispered, loud enough for a few nearby guests to overhear. "It's gone." A ripple of alarm spread through the room. What are you talking about? Eleanor demanded. I went to your dressing room to retrieve a file for the senator, he lied smoothly, and I noticed the drawer to your armoire was slightly ajar. I checked. The necklace is gone. Panic erupted. Eleanor's face went white. The staff was immediately summoned. Julian, taking charge, directed the head of security, a man loyal to him, to begin a search. No one leaves the apartment, he commanded. We must assume the thief is still among us. The atmosphere of celebration curdled into one of suspicion and accusation. The wealthy guests looked at the catering staff, the waiters, and the household employees with distrust. Lena, her heart pounding, helped to keep everyone calm, completely unaware that she was the target of the entire charade. Julian let the tension build for 10 excruciating minutes. Then he approached the head of security. Have you searched the staff's personal belongings? He asked, his voice carrying across the silent room. Not yet, sir, the guard replied. Then do so, starting with hers, Julian said, pointing a finger directly at Lena. Every head in the room turned. Lena froze, a deer in the headlights. A collective gasp went through the crowd. What? Lena stammered, looking from Julian's triumphant, predatory face to Eleanor's shocked one. It's simple procedure, Miss Williams, Julian said, his voice cold and formal. The person with the most access to my aunt, the newcomer with the questionable background. It's only logical we start with you. Humiliation washed over Lena in a hot, sickening wave. In front of all these powerful people, she was being singled out, accused. The security guard approached her grimly. Your bag, miss. Shaking, Lena retrieved her worn handbag from the staff office. She knew she was innocent, but the sheer force of Julian's malice was terrifying. She felt trapped, ensnared in a web she couldn't see. She handed the bag to the guard. He unzipped it and emptied its contents onto a nearby table. Her wallet, her keys, a tube of lip balm, a book of poetry, and then, with a dramatic flourish, the Vance star. It landed on the polished wood with a heavy, expensive clink, glittering under the chandeliers like a venomous snake. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Julian stepped forward, his face a mask of sorrowful disappointment. I knew it, he said, his voice filled with false regret. He looked at Eleanor. I told you, Aunt. I warned you. I told you she was a common thief. All eyes were on Eleanor. Her face was a storm of conflicting emotions. Shock, betrayal, confusion. The evidence was damning. The girl she had begun to trust, to see as a partner, perhaps even as something more, was seemingly a criminal. This was Lena's test, the ultimate trial by fire. She could have burst into tears. She could have screamed denials, shouted accusations at Julian. She could have broken down, confirming everyone's worst suspicions of her as a hysterical, guilty party. But she did none of those things. She stood perfectly still, her back straight, and lifted her chin. The humiliation was a fire in her veins, but she refused to let it consume her. She ignored the whispers, the stares, the damning evidence on the table. She looked at only one person, Eleanor. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the murmuring of the crowd with absolute clarity. I did not do this, she said, her gaze locked with Eleanor's. Her eyes did not plead or waver. They were filled with pain, yes, but also with an unshakable conviction. You have to believe me. The world seemed to shrink until it contained only the two of them, the billionaire and the waitress, the old woman who had lost her son and the young woman who might be his daughter. Eleanor stared into Lena's eyes, searching. She saw the hurt, the shock, but she did not see guilt. She did not see deceit. She saw the same fierce, unwavering integrity she had seen in Robert's letters. She saw the spirit of the woman her son had called his starling. In that moment, Eleanor Vance had to make a choice. She could believe the evidence in front of her, the logical conclusion championed by her own nephew, the man who ran her empire. Or she could believe in the intangible, unprovable character of a girl she barely knew, a girl who had walked into her life out of nowhere. She could trust her head, or she could trust her gut, the same maternal instinct she had so disastrously ignored 25 years ago. A profound stillness settled over her. She had made the wrong choice once before, and it had cost her everything. She would not make that mistake again. Slowly, deliberately, she turned away from the glittering necklace on the table. She turned away from the shocked faces of her guests. She turned to face her nephew, and her voice, when she spoke, was as cold and hard as diamond. "Leave her alone, Julian," she said. Julian stared at her, flabbergasted. "Aunt Eleanor, are you blind? The necklace is right there." "She is a thief," I said. Eleanor repeated, her voice rising with a power that no one in the room had heard from her in decades. "Leave her alone. This discussion is over. The party is over." She turned to the head of security. "Escort my guests out. All of them." Then she looked back at Julian, her eyes blazing with a fury that made him take an involuntary step back. "You and I will talk in the morning." She walked over to Lena, who was still standing, trembling, by the table. She completely ignored the priceless necklace. She gently took Lena's arm. "Come with me, child," she said softly, her voice now full of a fierce, protective warmth. She led Lena away from the scene of her humiliation, away from the stunned crowd and her nephew's apoplectic face. She had been tested, and she had made her choice. She had chosen faith. And in doing so, she had solidified a bond that was more powerful than any lie Julian Croft could ever hope to spin. The aftermath of the disastrous party was a quiet storm. Julian, thwarted and exposed in his failed gambit, retreated to lick his wounds, his fury a palpable thing that vibrated through the corporate offices of Vance Tower. He had underestimated both Lena's resilience and, more critically, his aunt's rekindled spirit. He had meant to isolate Lena, but he had only succeeded in cementing her place at Eleanor's side. The battle was far from over, but a decisive victory had been won. In the quiet sanctuary of the study, with the city lights twinkling far below, Eleanor made tea with her own hands, a gesture of care Lena found deeply moving. She handed a cup to Lena, whose hands were still shaking slightly. "I am sorry, Lena," Eleanor said, her voice heavy with regret. "I am sorry I ever allowed a man like him to have power in this family. I am sorry I put you in a position to be his target." "You believed me," Lena whispered, her throat tight with emotion. "Even when it looked, even with the necklace right there." "The necklace was evidence," Eleanor replied, her gaze firm. "But you are the truth. I saw it in your eyes." My son, Robert, had that same look, a sort of defiant honesty. I ignored it in him to my eternal regret. I will not make that mistake with you. The shared moment of crisis had forged a new intimacy between them. They were no longer just employer and employee, or even partners in an investigation. They were allies, bound by a common enemy and a common purpose. Vindicated and more determined than ever, they turned their attention back to the central, horrifying question. What did Jonathan Croft do to Sarah? The name Croft was the key. Julian's father was meticulous, Eleanor said, her mind working with a speed and clarity Lena hadn't seen before. He was a paranoid, controlling man who trusted no one. He documented everything. Financial transactions, surveillance reports, everything. He called them his private ledgers. He said they were his insurance policy. Where would they be? Lena asked. After Jonathan died 10 years ago, Julian had all of his father's personal office effects moved to the Vance corporate archives, Eleanor explained. It's a secure, off-site facility, a warehouse of secrets. Julian, as CEO, controls all access. So he'd never let us in, Lena said, her heart sinking. A hard, dangerous glint appeared in Eleanor's eyes. Julian is the CEO, but I am the majority shareholder. I am the founder. I am the name on the building. He has forgotten who holds the real power in this family. It is time I reminded him. The next morning, Eleanor, with Lena at her side, swept into Vance Tower not as a reclusive widow, but as the titan she truly was. She strode through the lobby, her presence commanding an awed silence. She didn't wait to be announced. She walked directly into the main boardroom, where Julian was in the middle of a meeting. "Julian," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "This meeting is over. Everyone, out." The board members, stunned, looked from the furious matriarch to the shocked CEO. Julian, his face pale with rage, tried to protest. "Aunt Eleanor, this is highly inappropriate." "What is inappropriate?" Eleanor cut in. "Is a nephew who tries to frame an innocent girl to cover up his father's crimes. What is inappropriate is denying me access to my own company's records. I want the key to the offsite archive. Now." Julian, seeing the implacable resolve in her eyes, knew he was beaten. To refuse would be to openly declare war, a war he would ultimately lose. Seething, he surrendered the access codes. The Vance archive was a vast, sterile warehouse on the industrial outskirts of the city. It was climate-controlled and silent as a tomb, aisle after aisle of towering metal shelves stacked with gray document boxes. It was the complete, documented history of a corporate empire stretching back 50 years. "We're looking for Jonathan Croft's personal effects from 25 years ago," Eleanor told the archivist, who scurried away to check the digital catalog. They were led to a remote corner of the warehouse. There, on a single shelf, were a dozen boxes labeled J. Croft Personal. For hours they worked, their hands growing grimy with dust. They opened box after box, finding old financial reports, employee evaluations, security protocols. It was the mundane paperwork of a corporate executive's life. Lena's hope began to fade. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe the ledgers were a myth or had been destroyed. And then, in the very last box, tucked beneath a stack of old tax returns, Lena found it. It was a small, unassuming book, bound in black leather. It had no title on the spine. It was a private diary, a ledger of sins. Her hands trembling, Lena opened it. The pages were filled with Jonathan Croft's tight, precise handwriting. Most of it was cryptic, a series of dates, names, and figures. It was a record of payoffs, blackmail, and corporate espionage. It was the secret history of how the Vance empire was protected. Lena flipped through the pages, her heart pounding, until she found the dates corresponding to Robert's disappearance. The entries were chilling in their banality. October 12th, R. Confronted E. Again Re. The girl, S.
E distraught. Defiant.
Situation critical. October 13th, surveillance on S. Confirms meeting scheduled with R. For tomorrow, 1,800 hours, downtown bus depot. Intent to flee. October 14th, met with R. This evening. Final warning issued. Subject unresponsive. Proceeding with contingency. Contingency. The word was cold, clinical, terrifying. Lena's eyes scanned down the page, her breath catching in her throat. And then she saw it. The entry that would unravel everything. The final, horrifying twist in the story. October 15th. Contingency successful. Team intercepted S. En route to depot. Subject transferred to Westbrook Clinic. Dr. Alastair overseeing. Amnesia protocol initiated. Expected full disorientation and memory fragmentation within 48 hours. Relocation to follow. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. She couldn't breathe. "Eleanor," she whispered, her voice a strangled gasp. Eleanor rushed to her side and read the entry over her shoulder. A low, guttural sound of pure horror escaped her lips. It wasn't just a threat. It wasn't a simple warning. It was a kidnapping, an abduction. Jonathan Croft had hired thugs to snatch a young, pregnant woman off the street. He had taken her to a private, unscrupulous clinic and had a doctor perform a procedure, a monstrous, unethical amnesia protocol, to deliberately damage her mind, to erase her memory of the man she loved. Lena frantically flipped the page. A few days later, there was another entry. October 20th S. Relocated to Midvale. New identity papers provided. Cash sum disbursed. Anonymous note left for R. Detailing S's payoff R. is devastated. Believes she was a gold digger who took the money and ran. Threat neutralized. Family protected. And one final, soul-crushing entry a week after that. October 27th. Confrontation with R. Complete. Presented evidence of S's betrayal. He is broken, has severed all ties with E, and is leaving the country. E is heartbroken but believes he has simply abandoned her. The cost is high, but the Vance line is secure. There it was. The full, monstrous truth, laid bare in neat, precise script. Jonathan Croft hadn't just separated two lovers. He had systematically destroyed them. He had drugged and brainwashed Sarah, dumping her in a strange city with a fractured mind. He had convinced his own nephew, Robert, that the love of his life was a cheap fraud. He had broken Robert's heart so completely that the young man fled his home, his family, and his country, cutting himself off from the mother who he now believed had driven away his one true love. And he had allowed Eleanor to believe for 25 years that her son had either died or abandoned her out of pure spite. It was a crime of breathtaking cruelty, all orchestrated to protect the family from a waitress's daughter. Eleanor Vance sank to the dusty concrete floor, the ledger clutched in her hands. The formidable matriarch, the corporate titan, was gone. In her place was a mother, convulsed by a grief so profound it was terrifying to witness. She let out a single ragged sob, a sound that seemed torn from the very depths of her soul. Her son's life had been stolen. Her grandchild had been stolen. And it had all been done by the people she had trusted most in her name. The weight of it was too much to bear. She had lost her son not once, but twice. First to her own pride, and then again to the unimaginable evil of her own family. The discovery in the archive was not an ending, but the beginning of a reckoning. For a day, Eleanor was consumed by a grief so profound it rendered her immobile. She sat in the study, the black ledger open on her lap, a silent, weeping monument to her stolen past. Lena stayed with her, not speaking, just being a quiet presence, a living testament to the fact that not all was lost. The crime had been monstrous, but it had produced one beautiful, resilient thing, a granddaughter. On the second day, the grief began to cool, hardening into a diamond-hard resolve. The tears stopped. A fearsome, glacial calm settled over Eleanor. The matriarch was back, and she was on the warpath. He knew, she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. Julian knew. His father would have told him, or he would have found the ledger himself. He has been actively covering this up for years. Her first call was to a team of private investigators, the best in the world, loyal only to her. She gave them the name of the Westbrook Clinic and Dr. Alastair. Find him, she ordered. I don't care how old he is or where he's hiding. Find him. Her second call was to the head of her personal legal team. I am preparing to dismantle the entire executive leadership of Vance Enterprises, she stated, her voice like ice. Prepare for the fight of your lives. While the investigators went to work, Eleanor focused on the most important task. My son, she whispered, her voice breaking for a moment. The ledger said he left the country, but it's been 25 years. Is he alive? Where is he? This was a task she entrusted to a different kind of specialist, a man who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. She gave him Robert's photograph, his old journals, and the heartbreaking story of his departure. He loves birds, she said. That's all I have. Find my son. While the wheels of justice began to turn, Eleanor prepared for the final confrontation. She summoned the entire board of Vance Enterprises for an emergency meeting in the main boardroom. The atmosphere was electric with tension. The board members, loyal to Julian and the status quo, looked at Eleanor as if she were a ghost who had come back to haunt them. Julian sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of arrogant composure. He believed he had weathered the storm. His aunt had her little emotional outburst, but he was still the CEO. He was still in control. He gave Lena, who stood silently behind Eleanor's chair, a look of pure contempt. Eleanor waited for the room to fall silent. She did not speak. Instead, she reached into her briefcase and pulled out Jonathan Croft's black leather ledger. She placed it in the center of the polished mahogany table with a soft thud that echoed like a gunshot. 25 years ago, she began, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room, I lost my son. I was led to believe he abandoned his family out of spite, or that he had died in a tragic accident. For a quarter of a century, I have lived in that prison of grief. I have been a ghost in my own life, in my own company. Today, I am going to tell you the truth. Then she began to read. She read Jonathan Croft's cold, clinical entries aloud. She read about the surveillance on Sarah. She read about the kidnapping. She read about the monstrous amnesia protocol. She read about the deliberate, cruel campaign of lies that broke her son's heart and drove him into exile. A horrified silence fell over the boardroom. The board members stared at the ledger, then at Julian, their faces a mixture of disbelief and dawning revulsion. My brother-in-law, Jonathan Croft, committed this crime, Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength. He did it, he claimed, to protect this family, to protect this company, from a girl whose only crime was to love my son. She then played a recording. It was a phone call. The investigators had found Dr. Alastair, now a disgraced, elderly man living in terrified obscurity. Faced with Eleanor Vance's wrath and the threat of prosecution, he had confessed everything. His trembling voice filled the room, corroborating every horrific detail from the ledger. Julian's composure finally began to crack. A sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead. This is history, he stammered, his voice strained. My father was overzealous. It was a different time. It has nothing to do with me. Doesn't it, Julian? Eleanor said, her eyes pinning him in his chair. You knew. You found this ledger after he died. You knew my son was alive. You knew he had been driven away by a lie. You knew an innocent woman had been brutalized. And you kept it from me. You let me grieve for nothing. You let me believe my son hated me. You did it to protect your own position. You did it to keep your control over my company. And then, she delivered the final, devastating blow. And you failed, she said, because while you were busy plotting and scheming, I was busy finding him. The doors to the boardroom opened. A man walked in. He was in his early 50s, with silvering hair and a deeply lined face. He was thin and he wore simple, functional clothes. He looked unassuming, ordinary. But he had his mother's eyes, and a quiet, gentle demeanor that was instantly recognizable from the old photographs. It was Robert Vance. He was alive. He had been living a quiet, solitary life in a remote coastal town in Oregon, working as a wildlife guide. He had never married. He had never loved again. He was a man still haunted by a heartbreak that was a quarter of a century old. Robert's eyes scanned the room, and then he looked at his mother. He had only learned the truth 2 days ago, when Eleanor's people found him. The shock, the grief, the rage, the impossible, dawning hope, it was all there on his face. Then he saw Lena standing behind his mother. He saw the starling wing locket at her throat. His eyes widened, and he took a faltering step forward. He looked from her face to the locket, and a lifetime of pain and confusion began to resolve in his mind. Julian stared at Robert as if he had seen a ghost. His carefully constructed world was shattering around him. The last vestiges of his control evaporated, replaced by pure, cornered animal panic. He leaped to his feet, his face contorted with rage, and pointed a shaking finger at Lena. Her! He screamed, his voice cracking. This is all her fault. If she hadn't come here, none of this would have happened. My father did what was necessary. That woman would have ruined our name. She was trash, and I continued his work. I protected this family. I protected this company from gold diggers like her. He shrieked, his confession born of pure, arrogant fury. She's just the next in line. His words, a raw, ugly admission of guilt and complicity, hung in the horrified silence of the room. He had condemned himself. The corporate titan was reduced to a sputtering, hateful child, confessing his sins to the world. Eleanor looked at him, not with anger, but with a cold, devastating pity. "Security," she said, her voice calm. "Remove Mr. Croft from the premises." As the guards took a struggling, shouting Julian by the arms, he locked eyes with Lena one last time. In her gaze, he didn't see triumph. He saw only a quiet, sad strength. He hadn't been defeated by a scheme or a plot. He had been defeated by the truth. The fall of Julian Croft was swift and absolute. The board, horrified by his confession and the revelation of the decades-long conspiracy, voted unanimously to remove him as CEO. Stripped of his position, his power, and his inheritance, Julian faced a barrage of criminal charges, from his role in the cover-up of Sarah's kidnapping to corporate fraud. The name he had been so desperate to protect was now mired in a scandal of his own making. The empire his father had helped build through cruelty and deceit was purged of their toxic influence. Justice, after 25 long years, was finally served. With the battle won, the quiet, more difficult work of healing began. Sarah, her physical health now stable under the care of the world's best doctors, was gently told the full story. The truth was a shock, but it was also a balm. It filled in the terrifying, confusing gaps in her memory, replacing the narrative of abandonment with the story of a stolen love. Knowing that Robert had not left her, that he had loved her and their unborn child, brought a measure of peace to her wounded heart. The fragments of her past began to coalesce into a coherent, if tragic, whole. But the most significant healing happened in a quiet, sunlit room at the Beaumont Clinic. Eleanor, holding her son's hand, brought him to meet Sarah for the first time in a quarter of a century. The reunion was tentative, fragile, and thick with the ghosts of lost time. Robert, a man who had lived in a self-imposed emotional exile for decades, looked at the woman he had loved with all his youthful passion, and saw both the girl he remembered and the gentle, weary woman she had become. Then Lena walked in. She stood beside her mother, the starling wing locket resting against her collarbone. Robert looked at her, at his daughter. He saw his own features reflected in her face, his mother's determined chin, Sarah's kind eyes. It was a miracle he had never allowed himself to dream of. The pain of his past was still there, a deep scar on his soul, but for the first time, a new feeling began to bloom in its place. A fragile, hesitant joy. He reached out a hand not to Sarah, but to Lena. "He promised," Lena said softly, her voice thick with emotion, "that the locket would lead him back." Robert's eyes filled with tears as he looked at the daughter he never knew he had. "It did," he whispered. A new family, fractured and scarred but finally whole, began to take its first, tentative steps. There was no magic reunion that erased the pain of the intervening years. There was only the quiet, difficult, and beautiful work of getting to know one another, of building bridges across a chasm of lost time, of forging new bonds of love and kinship. Lena finally had a father. Robert finally had a daughter. And Eleanor, who had believed her family was lost forever, now had them both. 6 months later, the relentless gray of the city sky was beginning to yield to the soft pastels of spring. From the expansive terrace of the Vance penthouse, the world looked different. Lena stood by the railing, the breeze catching her hair. She was no longer the tired, anxious waitress from the diner. A quiet confidence radiated from her, an earned serenity. The simple black dress she wore was her own, and the worry lines that had once etched her brow were gone. She wasn't just an heiress living in a gilded cage. At her insistence, Eleanor had established the Sarah Williams Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to providing legal and financial aid to victims of injustice, people who, like her mother, had been silenced and forgotten. Lena was its director. She had found not just security but purpose. Her life was no longer a loop of survival. It was a path of meaning. The sliding glass door opened, and Robert stepped out onto the terrace. He had changed, too. The deep, haunted sadness in his eyes had receded, replaced by a quiet warmth. He had put on some weight, and his smiles, once rare and fleeting, were now more frequent. He pointed to the sky. Look, he said, his voice filled with the old passion Lena had first read about in his journals. A peregrine. They're nesting on the spire of the one financial building. Lena smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. You taught me that, she said. They stood together in comfortable silence, father and daughter, watching the falcon circle in the urban canyons. In the living room, Eleanor was reading a book to Sarah, whose health was the best it had been in years. The penthouse, once a sterile monument to power and grief, was now a home, filled with the quiet hum of a healing family. What is the true measure of wealth? Is it found in the cold, hard numbers of a stock portfolio, or in the impenetrable walls of a corporate empire? Or is it found in the unbreakable bonds of family, in the resilience of a love that refuses to be extinguished by time and cruelty? A simple silver locket, a symbol of a young, hopeful love, had become a key, unlocking a prison of lies that had held a family captive for a generation. It served as a reminder that the most valuable things in this world are not the things we can buy, but the truths we have the courage to seek, and the love we have the strength to fight for. After all, isn't finding your way back to the people you belong with the greatest fortune of all? If this story of love, loss, and long-awaited justice touched your heart, please share it with others who believe in the power of truth and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Like and subscribe for more stories that inspire and uplift.